Greetings, class, and welcome to the last week of LAI 687. My paper presentation, where I'm going to be talking about, is entitled "Examining the Narrative Journey of a Tenure-Track Faculty Member and Their Engagement with Library Resources: a Lebovian Narrative Analysis." So the objective of my paper is I wish to examine the narrative journey and experiences of a tenure-track faculty member as she engages with library services and librarians in her pursuit in securing tenure. So just some information about why I chose this topic. My research interests are faculty perceptions of libraries and academic librarians and library services. I work as an academic librarian in the CUNY system. CUNY is the City University of New York, and it is a 25 campus system in the 5 boroughs of New York City. And I support the research, teaching, and learning of students, faculty, and staff. CUNY librarians do have faculty status, and we have professorial ranking, but most of the university community have no clue that we do. And our professional identity remains a mystery because the literature supports the idea that most library users have no clue what a librarian does. So I'm most interested in examining the narrative journey of a tenure-track faculty member and how she engages with librarians and the library and library services. And the literature suggests that, again, most of the university community really don't understand an academic librarian's role in supporting student learning and faculty research. So in terms of my research design, I used semi-structured interviews, and I interviewed one faculty member from the English department who began her tenure in 2010, 2 years after me. I began in 2008. I had 3 subsequent interviews. I started the interviews in spring of 2017, and in order to be transparent, I want to mention that the first interview was actually an assignment for a qualitative methods course, but I never used the data and I actually chose something else. And I thought I would expand my interviews over several years because the participant and I ended up being friends. So I started the interviews in spring of 2017, and I had 2 additional follow-up interviews in 2018 and 2019. And each interview was 45 minutes in length. I actually had a lot of data from these interviews, but I wanted just to mention that they were never used for any assignment. They were never used for publication in a journal because I believe I did not get IRB approval. And if I wanted to publish in an academic journal, I would have to get IRB approval, and I never did. Each interview was digitally recorded and transcribed using Dragon software. And during the interviews, I took field notes just to make sure that I was properly interpreting and analyzing what she was referring to. So I constantly made reference to my field notes to make sure that I was properly interpreting the narrative of her interview. We were both tenure-track faculty at the time. This particular participant started in fall of 2010, and I started in fall of 2008. And I'm going to talk about the journey and how we met and how we became friends outside of the workplace. And I did pay special attention to avoid any personal biases by constantly checking in to really ensure that my interviews weren't influencing her in a certain way in terms of her responses. So my participant was a tenure-track faculty member in the English department. Her name is Dr. Susie Smith, and that's a pseudonym. That's not her real name. She began her tenure at the College of Staten Island in 2010, And as a colleague, I provided library instruction classes for many of her first year college writing classes. We were colleagues because we were both from Canada and we both started the tenure track, roughly around the same time, me 2008, her 2010. And we also vented about our struggles obtaining tenure. And so that developed a level of trust, and we eventually became personal friends. And we're still friends 10 years later. I obtained tenure in 2015, and she was granted tenure in 2017. But unfortunately, because tenure is a process that takes up to 10 months, over the 10-month period from when her department granted her tenure, the president of the college unfortunately rejected her tenure the following year in 2018. And as I'm going to mention further on in my presentation, in 2018, she filed a grievance, which is another 10 months. And then in 2019, she lost her grievance. She lost the appeal. So by 2019, which was the date of the last interview, she actually lost the grievance and her tenure was denied. So in terms of myself trying to constitute the definition of narrative for these interviews, the concept of narrative for me and the themes that I was pulling out was really focusing on her experience as she navigated through her tenure track journey. Being hired in 2010 and moving from Toronto, Canada to Staten Island and using library resources and engaging with librarians. So those were the focus of my narrative. Also, as part of the narrative, I wanted to really investigate her experiences teaching first-year undergraduate classes and experiencing academic politics, which I've been in academia for close to 20 years. I'm very familiar as an academic librarian and very familiar with politics, and that's just normal. And also her struggle to find the necessary resources to support her scholarly research endeavors. That was also part of the narrative where she experienced a lot of frustration and a lot of challenges. Also, part of the journey of this narrative analysis is how she strived to attain tenure, and she did receive tenure from her in her department. And then, of course, part of the narrative is having the college president turn it down, which is pretty terrible. And then the last part of this narrative, which was an interview from 2019, was how she lost her appeal. And then finally, at the end, she left CSI. CSI, again, is the College of Staten Island. And she left academia altogether and completely had a brand new career change and moved out of New York City and doesn't even work in academia anymore. So my interview questions for my participant was, what challenges have you experienced in achieving tenure at the College of Staten Island? Another question is, how does the CSI Library, collection of print and electronic resources, how does it support your research? Another question is, how do CSI librarians support your students' information literacy skills? Also, how have you collaborated with the library in your teaching and research endeavors? Finally, what are your expectations of the CSI library as a faculty member? And finally, how do you perceive the role of an academic librarian in college? In terms of my analysis, I transcribed interviews from the 3 interviews over 2017, 2018, and 2019, and then I used field notes to provide codes for the different themes that emerged from the narrative. Then I reconstructed and interpreted the narrative by retelling the narrative from a participant using Labov's model of narrative analysis. So Labov's model of a narrative analysis involves 6 different elements. the abstract, which is a summary of the narrative, the orientation, which is who or what is involved, then the complicating action, which is the core part of the narrative structure, which is the main plot, and then the resolution, which is what finally happened, and then finally the evaluation, which is so what, and then the coda is how does it all end. So in my paper, I'm breaking up the 3 different interviews that I had with Dr. Susie Smith and really breaking it apart into the 6 elements of Labov's model of narrative analysis. Some of the emerging themes that I'm going to be discussing are the themes of frustration, for fearing being denied tenure because she felt that she had limited access to resources, and that the department pressured her to dumb down her courses. In addition to that frustration, she also experienced pressure by receiving multiple negative student evaluations and complaints. So Susie made courses too challenging, and her students complained that the courses were too challenging. So she was actually asked to dumb down her courses and make them easier so she would receive positive student feedback that would really help her in her dossier when she was applying for tenure. In terms of the theme of funding, she felt that the college library was really poorly funded and it could not support her scholarship. In the theme of using outside sources, Susie used consortial library resources outside of the CUNY system. She thought that the CUNY system, which comprises 31 libraries, she actually thought the library sucked and that the libraries were terrible and they just didn't really support her scholarship. And she felt that the library's printed collection was very outdated. And I mean, I would agree, but I didn't want to say anything. So she used a service called Marley. Marley is the Manhattan Research Library Initiative, which is a collaboration between the New York Public Library, NYU, and Columbia University. And it's open to students as well as faculty. I think it's mostly faculty that are in the CUNY system that wish to borrow items from NYU, Columbia, or New York Public Library. Other emerging themes include resentment, where she started to resent her department because they demanded that she would dumb down her courses so she would receive more positive student feedback, and she was becoming very resentful. Also, happiness. She felt very unhappy living on Staten Island. She had trouble adjusting, and she missed her family in Canada, and she just didn't adjust as well as other people. In terms of her struggle, she felt that her scholarly research suffered since her research interests were very specialized. Even though she was a faculty member in the English department, her research interests included Middle Eastern literatures, post-colonial theory, comparative and world literature, travel accounts, and cultural encounters between the East and the West. And she really felt that the CSI library and the other libraries in the CUNY system could not support her scholarly research. Some other personal challenges that she disclosed with me as a friend. So as both a researcher and as a friend, she received a cancer diagnosis during her 3rd year in the tenure clock, but she hid the illness from her colleagues. She also hid the illness from certain family members, but she did tell me during that time that she was ill. She also hid the illness from her students. So I don't know how she did that, but she is healthier and she is in remission right now. She did receive tenure in 2017 from the department, but it was rejected in 2018. And then she filed for grievance in 2019, and she subsequently lost the grievance in 2019. And so the grievance was extremely stressful. And I just in concluding the interviews, she concluded the interviews that she never wants to teach again. She never wants to teach students. She began to hate students, and she never wants to be in academia again. So clearly, the themes that I've outlined in my interviews with Dr. Susie Smith actually really negatively affected her experience being a tenure track faculty member at a university. And we both became US citizens. I became a US citizen in 2016. Susie became a US citizen in 2019, but she never really adjusted to living in the United States. So, as I conclude my narrative analysis of this presentation of the paper that I've written, I just wanted to show you some of the references to different citations, to different articles that have really informed me about, investigating the experiences of women of color who are tenure track faculty members and who are experiencing some obstacles as they pursue tenure in a post-secondary institution. So I hope that you found this presentation enlightening and interesting, and I'm really hoping to expand this research into my dissertation for as my coursework concludes this year. Susie and I are still friends, and we still keep in touch. And I really had some difficulty trying to keep a distance, but I'm very happy that she felt there was trust between us because she can open up and I can hear about her story. And I'm just very, very grateful that this will hopefully inform me as I expand this research into my dissertation. Thank you all for watching and listening, and I look forward to having engaging discussions on the discussion board about this particular topic. Thank you very much. Bye.